Welcome to the Entitled Files, where today we meet Patricia Greer, an HOA president who turned her suburban neighborhood into a personal kingdom of petty rules and illegal fines. Her reign went unchallenged, until she decided to target a retired Army veteran's American flag. From mysterious lawn chemicals to emergency board meetings, this suburban power struggle is about to get interesting. Let's dive right in. There are two types of people in this world, those who mind their own business and those who are the business. Unfortunately, my Homeowners Association president, Patricia Greer, self-appointed queen of our suburban nightmare, was the latter. She wasn't always this way, according to my neighbor Bob, who'd lived in Maple Grove Estates for 20 years. "Used to be normal," he told me over the fence one day, voice hushed like he was sharing state secrets. Then her husband left her for a yoga instructor and, well, he made a spiraling motion with his finger. Patricia transformed from a regular suburban mom into the neighborhood's self-appointed dictator. Her physical transformation was equally dramatic, trading in her casual wear for an endless parade of beige pantsuits, cutting her once-long hair into that iconic Karen bob with frosted tips, and permanently affixing an expression that suggested she was perpetually smelling spoiled dairy. That's where I come in. Name's Mike Dawson, retired Army veteran, 20 years of service, 3 tours in Afghanistan, and the poor sucker who made the mistake of buying a home in her domain. After years of military discipline, I thought I knew everything about following rules. But Patricia's rules? They made military regulations look like friendly suggestions. I should have known something was off during the home viewing. The real estate agent kept nervously glancing at her watch, rushing me through rooms and whispering something about approved viewing hours. But the house was perfect. 3 bedrooms, a massive garage for my tools, and, most importantly, a price I could afford on my military pension. The closing went smoothly, and I moved in on a sunny Saturday in April. My sister Sarah helped me unpack, commenting on how quiet and clean the neighborhood was. "Almost too quiet," she joked, like one of those horror movies where everything looks perfect until the bodies start piling up. She wasn't far off. My first week in Maple Grove Estates was deceivingly peaceful. I spent it unpacking, arranging furniture, and setting up my workshop in the garage. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, though I noticed they kept their conversations brief and kept glancing over their shoulders like they were afraid of being caught socializing. On day 6, I hung up my American flag. It wasn't anything extraordinary, a 3-by-5-foot standard flag that had traveled with me through 3 different states and 7 different homes. This particular flag held special meaning. It was given to me by my unit after my last tour. The sight of those stars and stripes gently waving in the breeze made my new house feel like home. That peace lasted exactly 47 hours. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the front porch when I spotted her. Patricia Greer, power walking down the sidewalk in a beige pantsuit that somehow matched both her shoes and her clipboard. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw my flag, her face contorting like she'd bitten into a lemon. The next morning, I found an official-looking notice taped to my mailbox. The paper was expensive cardstock, and the HOA logo was embossed in gold, because apparently regular paper wasn't fancy enough for violations. It read, "Violation Notice. Your property is in breach of HOA regulations due to an unauthorized external decoration. Remove it within 48 hours to avoid fines. First offense, $150. Second offense, $300. Third offense, board review and possible lien. Sincerely, Patricia Greer, HOA President, Maple Grove Estates." I read it twice, then a third time, convinced it had to be some sort of joke. My next-door neighbor Tom was watering his meticulously maintained roses when I walked over, notice in hand. "Hey Tom, what's the deal with this?" He nearly dropped his watering can. "Oh man, you got flagged already?" He winced at his unintentional pun. "Look, Mike, my advice? Just take it down. Patricia, she's relentless. Last year, the Hendersons put up wind chimes. Wind chimes. She cited them for noise pollution until they moved. But I wasn't about to back down. 20 years in the Army taught me to pick my battles, and this was one worth fighting. I marched inside and dialed the HOA office number. The phone rang twice before that nasally voice answered. "Hello, Greer residence," Patricia answered, as if running an HOA from her living room was completely normal. "Hi, this is Mike Dawson, new homeowner at—" "I know who you are," she interrupted, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that comes from spending too much time policing other people's lives. "I was expecting your call. The Andersons called to inform me about your installation. The moment it went up." "Great, she had informants." "Right, well, I got this notice about my flag." "Yes, you need to take it down immediately. External decorations must be approved by the HOA board," she said. I could practically hear her shuffling through papers, probably looking for more rules to cite. "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level, the way I used to when dealing with particularly difficult superior officers. "I served under that flag for 20 years. 3 tours in Afghanistan. I'd like to see where in the bylaws it says I can't fly it. Article 7, Section 3, subsection B clearly states there is a strict uniformity clause," she snapped. "If you'd read the rules, you'd know that. We maintain property values through aesthetic consistency." "That's interesting," I replied, pulling out my own folder. "Because I've been doing some reading myself. Are you familiar with the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005? Silence on the other end. It specifically prohibits HOAs from restricting homeowners from displaying the American flag. So unless you want to explain to a judge why you're violating federal law—" "Fine," she huffed, cutting me off. "Keep your flag. But don't think this means you can just do whatever you want in this neighborhood. There are still rules, Mr. Dawson, and I intend to ensure they're followed." The threat in her voice was clear as day. "Have a nice day, Patricia," I said, and hung up. Later that afternoon, I was fixing my garage door when Bob came over with a 6-pack of beer. "Heard you went toe-to-toe with the Dragon Lady," he said, handing me a cold one. "Not many people stand up to her anymore. After what happened to the Johnsons." "What happened to the Johnsons?" Bob took a long sip. "They tried fighting her on the garden gnome ban last summer. Next thing you know, their trash isn't getting picked up, their mail's getting lost, and their kids aren't allowed in the community pool because of some mysterious paperwork issue." He shook his head. "They sold at a loss and moved to Arizona." I looked at my flag, still proudly waving in the evening breeze. "Well, she better get used to disappointment, because this flag isn't going anywhere." "Just watch your back," Bob warned. "Patricia plays dirty, and she's got eyes everywhere." As if on cue, Mrs. Anderson across the street quickly ducked behind her curtains when I looked over. That night, I installed security cameras around my property. 20 years in the military taught me another valuable lesson. Always secure your position when you're in hostile territory. And make no mistake, I was in hostile territory. 2 peaceful weeks passed. Well, as peaceful as things could be with Patricia's minions documenting my every move. I caught Mrs. Anderson photographing my house no less than 6 times, and the retired couple next door suddenly developed an intense interest in power walking past my driveway multiple times a day. Then came the truck incident. My Ford F-250 had been with me longer than most relationships. Desert tan, a few battle scars, but reliable as the day is long. I used it for everything, hauling supplies for my woodworking projects, helping neighbors move, the ones brave enough to accept, and towing my small fishing boat on weekends. One morning, I found another one of Patricia's gold-embossed notices fluttering under my windshield wiper. This one read, "Violation Notice. Personal vehicles must be stored in the garage overnight. Oversized trucks are not allowed in visible driveways. Commercial vehicles are strictly prohibited. Fine schedule. First offense, $200. Second offense, $400. Third offense, vehicle subject to towing. Additional note, all modifications, including aftermarket accessories, must be approved by the board. Sincerely, Patricia Greer, HOA President, Maple Grove Estates." I surveyed the street. Dr. Morrison's BMW sat in his driveway. The Wilsons had 2 SUVs parked outside. Even Patricia's precious Mercedes was visible from the street. This was targeted harassment, plain and simple. I grabbed my phone and dialed the now familiar number. Mike, she sighed dramatically before I could speak. Are you really going to argue about this, too? You're damn right I am, I said. I've counted 7 other vehicles parked in driveways on this street alone. Yes, but yours is an eyesore. She spat the word like it was poison. This isn't some military base. We have standards. It's a Ford, Patricia, not a Humvee. And unless you're planning to cite everyone else with a vehicle in their driveway, we are a community of aesthetic harmony, she interrupted, her voice rising to that particular pitch that made dogs howl. And your military-style vehicle, show me where in the bylaws it specifically prohibits trucks. Article 9, Section. The actual clause, Patricia, not some vague reference you're reinterpreting. The silence was deafening. I'll have the board review this matter, she finally said. You do that. In the meantime, my truck stays where it is. That evening, Bob came over with more beer and news. She's called an emergency board meeting, he said, settling into one of my porch chairs. Tomorrow night at her house. Heard she's trying to push through a new vehicle regulation. I took a long pull from my beer. Who's on this board anyway? Patricia, obviously. Mrs. Anderson, no surprise there. Dr. Morrison, but he never shows up, and... Bob looked sheepish. Me. I nearly choked on my beer. You're on the board? Keep your enemies closer, right? He winked. Someone's got to be the voice of reason. Though usually I'm outvoted. The next morning, my security cameras caught Patricia herself measuring my truck with a tape measure at 5:30 a.m. She was wearing what appeared to be tactical black clothing as if she was on some covert HOA mission. That's when I decided to up the ante. I drove to the auto parts store and bought the biggest American flag mount they had. By noon, Old Glory was proudly flying from the back of my truck, visible from 3 blocks away. The text from Bob came within the hour. Emergency board meeting canceled. P is having what the Andersons are calling an episode. Patricia's retaliation came swiftly and, quite literally, under cover of darkness. It started with whispers. Walking down the street, I'd catch fragments of conversations. Did you see Dawson's lawn? Such a shame. Bringing down property values. My lawn was immaculate. 20 years of military precision doesn't disappear in civilian life. I mowed in perfect lines, edged weekly, and maintained a watering schedule that would make a botanist proud. But suddenly, neighbors were looking at my yard like it was a toxic waste dump. Then came the anonymous helpful notes in my mailbox. Lawn Care Services recommendation, call Patricia for details. Your grass seems stressed, the HOA's approved landscaper can help. Consider professional intervention before it's too late. I threw them all away. But on Wednesday morning, at precisely 6:17 a.m., according to my security footage, everything changed. I was doing my morning PT routine when I heard the distinctive sound of a spray tank. Through my window, I spotted a figure in a neon yellow vest methodically spraying something on my lawn. I burst out the front door, still in my workout clothes. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? The guy, barely old enough to buy beer, practically jumped out of his skin. His name tag read Tyler. The HOA sent me. Said your grass was too patchy and needed treatment. He gestured vaguely with the sprayer, looking like he wanted to disappear. Patchy? I walked onto my pristine lawn. Show me exactly where. Well, Tyler shuffled uncomfortably. Mrs. Greer said it was preventative for the, fungus problem. What fungus problem? The one she said is spreading through the neighborhood? His voice went up at the end, making it sound more like a question than a statement. That's when I noticed something peculiar. Through the morning mist, I could see strange patterns emerging on lawns up and down the street. Brown patches in otherwise healthy grass. They appeared random unless you knew what to look for. Targeted chemical burns designed to look like natural damage. Tyler, I said, using my calm but serious sergeant voice, what exactly are you spraying? He looked at the tank, then at me, then back at the tank. Mrs. Greer provides the solution, says it's proprietary. Does this proprietary solution have proper EPA registration? Tyler's face went white. I'd suggest you pack up and leave, now, and Tyler, I called as he hastily began gathering his equipment. "You might want to find a new job, one that doesn't involve illegal chemical applications." He practically ran to his truck. I took samples from the spots he'd sprayed and photos of the mysterious dead patches appearing throughout the neighborhood. Then I marched straight to Patricia's house, evidence in hand. Her house was exactly what you'd expect, beige on beige with carefully cultivated roses and a blessed sign hanging above her door. I knocked firmly. The door opened, and there stood Patricia in her morning glory. A silk robe over what appeared to be a tennis outfit, clutching a world's best HOA president mug that she'd probably bought herself. "Can I help you?" Her smile was as fake as her frosted tips. "You sent someone to mess with my lawn?" "I sent someone to help with your subpar landscaping," she corrected, taking a sip from her mug. "The board is very concerned about the declining standards in the neighborhood. The only decline I see is where your hired guy is poisoning people's lawns." Her smile flickered. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Dawson. One that could be considered defamatory." "Funny you should mention legal terms," I said, pulling out my phone. "Because I've got some interesting footage to share with the EPA and the County Environmental Board, not to mention the police." For the first time, I saw real fear crack through her perfectly maintained facade. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. In Patricia's case, it was served with a side of perfectly organized paperwork and enough documentation to bury her HOA career 6 feet under. First, I did my reconnaissance. 20 years in the military teaches you to gather intelligence before launching an offensive. I started with Bob, my man on the inside. "The HOA financial records," I asked him over beers one evening. "Where are they kept?" Bob grinned. "Funny you should ask. As board treasurer, even though Patricia never lets me actually handle anything, I'm supposed to have access, but..." He pulled out a thick folder from his briefcase. "I've been keeping my own records. Every receipt, every expenditure she's tried to hide." The documents told a story that would make an IRS auditor salivate. $15,000 for landscape maintenance that mysteriously aligned with Patricia's new backyard renovation. The $10,000 for security services that consisted of her nephew driving around in a golf cart. $25,000 for community improvements that all seemed to center around her property. Countless smaller expenses for office supplies delivered to high-end boutiques. But I needed more, so I went door to door, building my case and my support base. The Hendersons shared documentation of false violations that disappeared after private consultations with Patricia. Mrs. Johnson, who'd been denied pool access for her kids, provided emails showing Patricia had altered their application dates. Even Dr. Morrison, the absent board member, had a story about donations required for architectural approvals. Then came the annual HOA meeting. Patricia had scheduled it for 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, when most people would be at work. She didn't expect half the neighborhood to show up, much less with me leading the charge. The community center was packed. Patricia sat at her little throne, actually a slightly larger chair she'd specially ordered with HOA funds, looking confused as people kept filing in. "Before we begin," she started, shuffling her papers importantly, "I'd like to address the recent concerns about property values." "Point of order," I stood up, my voice carrying through the room like I was back on the parade ground. "According to HOA bylaws, we need to address any member-submitted agenda items first." Patricia's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. "I haven't received any agenda items." "Check your email," I smiled. "Sent certified mail, too, just to be safe." She glanced at her phone, face growing paler by the second. "Now then," I continued, setting up my laptop and projector, "another military habit, always be prepared. Let's talk about financial accountability." For the next 30 minutes, I laid out everything: the misappropriated funds, the selective enforcement, the illegal landscaping scheme, even the private security force that was really just her nephew playing cop. "This is slander," Patricia screeched, standing up so fast her special chair toppled backward. "I'll sue." "Actually," came a voice from the back, "it's all public record." A man in a suit stepped forward. "John Martinez, County District Attorney's Office. We've been very interested in Mrs. Greer's creative accounting." Patricia's face went through several interesting colors before settling on a sickly shade of gray. "I moved for an immediate board election," Bob called out, right on cue. "Seconded," came a chorus of voices. "This is ridiculous," Patricia stammered. "You can't just—" "Article 4, Section 7 of the bylaws," I quoted. "Members can call for emergency board elections with a 2/3 majority vote. Shall we count hands?" The vote wasn't even close. Patricia Greer's reign as HOA queen ended in a landslide, with yours truly elected as the new president. The aftermath of Patricia's dethroning was both swift and satisfying. Within 24 hours, her precious World's Best HOA President mug was packed away, along with her collection of violation notice templates and her gold-embossed letterhead. My first act as president? Establishing the Common Sense Committee, a group of reasonable homeowners tasked with reviewing and revising every single one of Patricia's ridiculous rules. We called it the Great Purge. Out went the ban on garden gnomes, the approved colors paint chart, which, suspiciously, consisted of various shades of beige, the aesthetic harmony clause, the mandatory landscaping service requirement, and about 50 other petty regulations. In came transparent financial reporting, democratic decision-making processes, a reasonable approach to property maintenance, and most importantly, a mind-your-own-business clause. But the real justice came from the county investigation. Turns out the district attorney's office had been building a case against Patricia for months. The evidence I gathered was just the final nail in her beige coffin. The headlines in the local paper said it all. HOA president charged with embezzlement. Queen of the cul-de-sac faces multiple counts of financial misconduct. Patricia was ordered to pay back $157,000 in misappropriated funds plus fines. Her Mercedes disappeared from the driveway, replaced by a used Hyundai. The pantsuits gave way to sweatpants, and her perfectly manicured lawn. Well, let's just say it's amazing how quickly grass dies when you can't afford to illegally poison your neighbors' yards anymore. The neighborhood transformed. Kids started playing outside again. People actually talked to their neighbors. The Hendersons put their wind chimes back up. Mrs. Johnson's children splashed happily in the community pool. Someone even painted their door fire engine red. And the world didn't end. My flag still flies proudly, now joined by several others along the street. My truck sits in the driveway, occasionally accompanied by a boat or a trailer, and nobody files a complaint. The grass grows, people mow it, and somehow property values haven't plummeted into the abyss as Patricia predicted. I still see her sometimes, power walking past my house in her discount store activewear. She always glares at my flag, my truck, my perfectly normal lawn. And I always wave, usually while sitting in my front yard on a non-HOA-approved lawn chair, drinking a beer at an unapproved time of day. Last week, Bob and I installed a new sign at the neighborhood entrance. Under "Welcome to Maple Grove Estates," it reads, "A community of neighbors, not rules." Patricia drove past as we were putting it up. I swear I saw her eye twitch. But the best part? Every 4th of July now, we have a neighborhood-wide flag display. This year, I might even put up 2. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning, it's creating something better from the ashes of tyranny. And that, my friends, is how you take down an HOA Karen. P.S. The garden gnome population has tripled, and honestly, the neighborhood looks better for it. If you enjoyed watching this HOA Karen get exactly what she deserved, hit subscribe for more stories of entitlement meeting consequences. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Entitled File.